I'll be recording the session so we can make it available afterwards. And then we're going to have around 20 minutes for questions. So if you have a question, you can please write it in the chat or send me a message so I can organize a queue with everyone so we can do it in an organized way. I'll please want to ask you not to open your videos or your cameras and your microphones during the presentations because we will be recording that. So firstly, I would like to thank Professor Bart Verspagen for his availability in giving us this very interesting presentation. So thank you very much, Professor, and please, you can start whenever you want.
Okay, thank you, Danilo, and thank you to all the others for joining in. I'm also going to leave my camera off because I'm in my home office and my connection is not so fast that the camera works flawlessly. So I'm just going to do a bit of presentation, which I hope you can see. Very quickly as an introduction, I do really very much welcome this initiative and of course also the topic of this series, Innovation in Developing Countries, because that is one of the main topics in our institute at UNU Merit. But I have to apologize that today I'm going to talk about innovation, but not about developing countries. In fact, what I will have to say is a piece of research that deals only with, or mainly with, the United States. In that sense, it doesn't quite fit the topic of the series. I apologize for that, not because I find developing countries uninteresting, but it is essentially because right now this is the piece of research that I have to discuss, and I have very little work of my own on developing countries. So I'm going to really talk about ongoing research, as it says on this slide here, it's together with my co-author Underlo from Eindhoven. And it is literally ongoing because I have been working on some of the estimations that I'm going to show you today. I've been working on them only yesterday, so it's very fresh and ongoing. So also some of the ideas are relatively fresh, but in that sense, you can be sort of guinea pigs, so that all the comments and the criticism you might have, I'm sure, will benefit the future version of this. I see that somebody cannot hear me very well. I will see if I can move a little bit closer to the mic.
Yeah, Professor. I'll try to increase the volume of the presentation to the maximum, and if you could please speak closely to the microphone. Thank you so much.
I'll try to do that. Okay, so let me simply move to what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about two things today: technological trajectories and regions. And let me start by explaining what I mean by technological trajectories. In fact, there's a big literature on that. It used to be a big literature, at least in the 1980s and the 1990s. But I think it's a very important piece of literature. I'm following Dosi, who published a paper on technological trajectories paradigms in the 1980s. And I'm going to loosely define technological trajectory as the sort of main road of technological development. And I just want to give you an example of from the history of technology, an example which comes from steam engines and steam technology. This graph here on the top gives you the evolution of the performance of a particular kind of steam engines over the course of the century. I'm not going to go into how that works exactly, what the measure is, etc. It's simply a measure of performance. And the point I want to make is that measure of performance, the increase in performance of these steam engines was the result of a continuous series of incremental innovations. You see a couple of examples in the pictures below. On the left you have very early design, and on the right you have a building which embodies a much bigger design of that same kind of engine. The main point here is that what happened over this, I think that very well, so maybe I should also look at a few of these things myself and see if I can increase because it's probably not much use to go on and simply go on if people cannot hear very well. I don't think there is much that I can do in the controls. A lot of the
sorry, Professor, is the Wi-Fi? I'm looking here in the quality of the connection. It's saying that it's okay, but in your side, is it close to the router, to the modem?
Almost on top of it. So.
Okay.
And I can also hear you very well. But, let's see. I don't know if there's not much that I can do in terms of controls of this application, of the GoToMeeting application. I can choose a different microphone, but I don't have one, and I cannot increase the volume of the microphone or anything like that. I can see if I can turn the microphone up on my. So maybe some people are trying to do something about this, but should I go on, or should I try to speak up, or
yeah, because for at least for me, I can hear you perfectly. I'm trying to see if there is a possibility of doing a phone call instead of but actually yeah, Professor, you can keep going.
Okay, then I will continue.
Yeah, please, if we see an alternative doing a phone call, I will stop you. Is it okay?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Let me move on. And on these technological transactions, the main idea is that this is a sequence of incremental over a longer period of time will determine the main direction of technological change. And these main directions of technological change, they are specific to a particular field. So, for example, steam engines that are used in that I just showed on the previous slide. And that these trajectories are then formed by a combination of technological opportunities and economic conditions. In the case of the steam engines, for example, the coal prices, relevant because that's the fuel that you use to drive these engines. But in other cases, it could be a completely different kind of economic conditions. But it's a combination of technological opportunities and economic conditions. Now, our interest in this particular paper or in this presentation is to investigate whether geographical regions will play a role in the formation and the shaping of these technological trajectories. I don't have a lot of time to discuss it, but the reference paper that was distributed, at least a link to it, provides some preliminary evidence that, in fact, these regions, these geographical regions, are important in the formation of these technological trajectories. In this paper is we use background to develop the potential role as a way in which technological change is based in partly in complexity theory, where Stu talked about technological landscapes, MK landscapes, as the operation in the mathematical sense. But it has also been applied in management theory, where Dan Leventhal, for example, as a theoretical basis for his work on patent portfolios of particular firms. The idea in this theory is that the search process, and that search process is often local. That means that any invent something or make an innovation is going to start from the knowledge that they already have. So they're going to look at small variations of the kind of knowledge that they have. But knowledge at the same time, the development of knowledge is also a process of recombination. So you try to use things from different kind of backgrounds, then combine these into a new piece of knowledge. This recombination is often contains an element of non-local search. You try to get something from relatively far away, a really kind of different piece of knowledge that you have, and you try to combine that with the things that you already know. The sort of way to look at it then is that technological change, patent statistics, is a combination of local search, cumulative, building on what you already have and what you have done in the past, and the role of diversity on local search. And what we're going to investigate is that regions will reinforce the local character of the search. So they will especially work on the side of the local search process leading to further technological change. I'm going to explain that further down in the presentation. We're going to apply this idea of recombinant search to technological trajectories. It has been already applied to patents as indicators of invention, but it has been applied mostly to individual patents. And we know that these individual patents are usually really small pieces of technological change. They are incremental inventions most of the time, and we're going to investigate whether this recombinant search idea can actually also be applied to the biggest directions of technological change, that is the trajectories. We're going to do that by, first of all, identifying these trajectories. We're going to do that essentially as a network method. I'm going to explain how that works in a minute, but it is important to know that we are not going to do what a lot of other people have done in the past, that is to just look at one particular field of technology, like semiconductors or fuel cells, but we're going to look at the entire technological space using the entire database of all patents that have been applied for in the European Patent Office. And we're going to map them as a network and extract from that network the technological trajectories. And again, I'm going to explain how that works. I don't have any time to explain all the details, but there's references here on the slides to some of the work of people that have done that, and certainly the background paper has all the formal references to all the methods. So if you would like to look at that, it's all available there. What we're doing essentially is we're using a method that was pioneered by Hammond and Doran, who treat a citation data set as a so-called non-cyclical and directed networks. What that means, the directed part of it is fairly simple. It means that if you look at a citation and you consider the citation as a flow of knowledge, that it has a direction. It goes from the cited patent to the citing patent. And that's one important aspect which limits to an important extent the kind of network methods that you can use on this thing. The non-cyclical nature of the network means that if you would start at one particular pattern, follow the trail of citations from this pattern, you could never go back to the pattern where you started. That's also, again, a very important characteristic of the network that limits what you can do in terms of methods. So I'm going to give you just a brief metaphor for how you can think about these technological trajectories that we're going to use. I'm going to show you this picture. This is a picture of a pattern citation network that I've used in the past. This is in fact a very small one. It is about 6,000 patterns. And the network that we are using is really a lot larger. It's about 250,000. So it's a lot bigger and more chaotic than this one. Now, what we are trying to do is we are trying to find in this big network where the red dots are the patterns and the lines are the citations between them, we are going to imagine that you would travel, that knowledge would travel through this network. And you could start at any point, so you could start, for example, this. And then the idea is that some particular path through this network would be traveled a lot of the time, and others would not be traveled so often. So if you follow the citation length that they embody, then some of the paths are like highways, and other parts of the network are like really small kind of roads, local roads. And if you use that method, then you can extract from the network something like this. And that, of course, looks a lot more regulated, less chaotic, and much more easy to analyze. So what we're going to do is essentially extract all these trajectories from that big network of about 250,000 patterns. We're not going to map it, but we're going to analyze it. And I'm going to tell you in a minute how we are going to analyze that. But this is an example of how that method essentially works. Let me take this a little bit further and let me show you a toy example network of the kind that we have, and of the kind that we are going to analyze. And that toy network is very useful to illustrate the kind of things that we're interested in. The first thing that we are interested in is if you go from here to here, what determines whether a pattern survives that step? So what determines whether a pattern would be on, let's say, the highways, on the main trajectories? And then once we have this network of the highways of technological change, then we're going to look at two important things, which are splits and merges of paths. And this pattern here in the middle, number 14, if you can actually see it, it's very small print, but that pattern actually has both. So what we see is that there's a path that starts here on the left, the kind of path, and following it here from the left to the right. That's how we set it. Here is continuing for a while, and then here at pattern number 14 is going to merge with another path. And we call that simply a merge of two different paths in this network. And this is interesting because at that point, at that pattern number 14 here in the middle, you increase the base of knowledge from which you can draw. At 9, you can only draw from this upper branch. At number 10, you can only draw from this lower branch, but at 14, you can draw from both these branches. So it's an increase in the knowledge base that you can draw upon. If you talk about a split, it's exactly the opposite. If you go here from 14, you go the upper half, then you can only reach these 4 endpoints here at the end on the right-hand side. But if you go the lower branch, then you can only reach these 4 things here. So that splitting of the network, splitting of the path, leads to some kind of a path dependency, right? So here you have to make a choice whether you go up or down, and that choice limits the kind of destinations that you can reach in the future. And these are essentially the things that we're interested in. So we want to know in the network that we're going to use what determines whether you have such a split, whether a pattern becomes such a split, or whether it's on a merge. So let me move to the actual analysis, and I'm not going to talk a great deal about regression coefficients, but I am going to tell you what kind of regressions we are doing. The dependent variables, as I've already said, there are essentially 5 of them. First of all, does a particular pattern citation actually get onto the network of trajectories? Second, given that a citation is on the network of trajectories, what determines whether it forms a split or a merge? And then, given that it is on the network, what determines how severe that split or the merge is? So what is the drop? And let me just go back to the previous slide to show you that. So here you would be in pattern number 14, you would be able to reach 8 different destinations in the network. If you then move to the upper part, you will only be able to reach 4 final destinations. So the drop is 4. It's 8 minus 4. That's one of our dependent variables. And for the rise, the broad base, it works in exactly the same way. If you're on this part, you have 1 base, 1 pattern in the base. Here you have 1. If you then merge, you go from 1 to 2. So the rise is 1. That's our dependent variables. And then we're going to have a number of independent variables, and those will involve the role of regions. So I need to talk a little bit about how we define regions in this analysis and how we use the regions. I'm focusing here on the US essentially because the US has a very fine geographical disaggregation. There's counties, there's data at the level of a county, and I'll show you in a minute how that looks on the map. And that's really a fine disaggregation that we do not have for other regions of the world like Europe. They're usually a lot coarser, bigger units, and therefore the interest is a little bit less. I know that this is not really a very good reason, whatever, it's not, should not always be a reason for choosing. But in our case, this is really important. We're going to, first of all, define what we call a regional or geographical cluster of strong inventive activity. And that cluster is defined as a group of adjacent counties on the map, so counties that share a border, that have heavy knowledge flows within them. Let me just show you the actual maps that we are using. The bottom map here is simply a map of all the counties in the US with the number of patents in them. So a white county has no patents, and anything that has a brownish type of color has actual patents in it over the period that we're working, which is essentially the 1980s to the 2010s. The darker the color is, the more patents there are in that particular county. We are then measuring the number of citations that are going on between the counties. And if we use that, and again, I don't have much time, the detailed procedure, but it's in the reference paper, then we define the clusters as they are on the upper part of the map. So that things here are the clusters that we're going to use in the analysis. And there are about 40 of these clusters on the map. So that's the geographical units, and we're treating essentially on the right part of this upper map as a single cluster also. We're going to actually define a citation network from which we're going to extract the technological trajectories. And we're doing that in a very particular way. We take all the patents in 1980 that emerged from one of these geographical clusters in the US. Then we take all the patents in 2000. Then we take all the patents that lie on a between any combination of them. a network of roughly between. Let me apply this algorithm, the one that I briefly discussed, and in our way of doing that, we actually find all the trajectories that have at least a certain level of knowledge flowing on them. And that level of knowledge can be set, can be varied as a threshold, and we actually use different thresholds to see how robust results are. So threshold essentially as a measure of the size of the road. Every road that's higher than that particular size is going to be in our analysis, and we vary the size. So we go from allowing fairly small roads to allowing only the biggest highways on this citation network. We have two working hypotheses. And the first one is that the formation of this network of trajectories, depending on the threshold, will involve both local and non-local search, or cumulativeness and diversity. And we look at local search as the default. Sorry, there's a small typo there, but we look at local search as the default, and non-local search occurring when diminishing returns to local search are setting in. That's our first working hypothesis, that we will always find a combination of local and non-local search determining this. And the second working hypothesis is that regions will contribute to the forces of local search, and that the level of variety, that the role of variety is more at the level of individual patterns. And this notion of regions as a driver of local search comes from the literature on regional innovation systems, which we again also discuss in this. Okay, then let me quickly move over some of the results. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time looking at the regression coefficients, because you can see that already the definition of the independent variables is fine print, and the regression results is going to be even finer print. Not chance looking at a lot of detail on that side of the analysis, but I results to you and then give an interpretation of what we are finding. So with regard to the independent variables, we essentially have variables from 4 different kinds of groups. The first group is variables that are related to the region, and we have essentially 2 things. We have the scale of the region in terms of its number of patterns, and we have the diversity of the region, technological diversity of the region, again in terms of the patterns and where do they come from. So this diversity measures, is that region specialized in only one kind of technology, or does it have a larger range of technologies that it invents? We have that because we have a citation network. We can define those variables both at the cited patent level and at the citing level. So we have 4 variables related to the region. We have a number of variables related to the technology class. That's only the scale part. We did experiment with the geographical diversity of the class, but that was never important in the regression, so we left it out. And we have a number of variables related to the patent or citation itself. The technological diversity of the patent, technology systems have the geographical similarity between the cited and the citing patent, so the combination of citing and cited, do they tend to come from the same region or not? And the technological class similarity, do they come from the same technological background, the citing and cited patent. That's a total of 4 variables as well. And then we have a number of variables related to the network of the main path. So related to how much is this pattern connected to in that network of technological trajectories. Main path is a term that I use as a synonym for trajectories. Okay, but that's the variables. let me just flash a couple of the results to you. We start with a probit regression on whether a particular citation is on the tip of trajectories or not. Here you can see that it has and we do a probit on that whether a particular citation is on this highway or on this trajectory. But I've told you that we have different thresholds, so we can do this regression for every one of the thresholds. We use 4 different ones, and I'm not going to tell you or show you all the results from all those different thresholds. I simply marked in boldface here those coefficients which are robust between those different thresholds. So this one here, for example, tells you that this pattern is robustly significant and positive at a high significance level throughout all these different thresholds. You can see that there's quite a few of these variables planted in bold. The top one here are essentially controls, dummy controls that are not so interesting, so it's only from about here where the variables start to be really interesting in a theoretical way. The other regressions are even smaller. They come out really small, so I'm not going to even discuss any of the coefficients here, but I'm just going to tell you it's the same kind of principle. We do a probit regression for whether a particular citation is either a merge or a split in that network of trajectories. We look at whether it is robustly so on all of the thresholds, and then we consider that as an interesting variable. So that makes 3 probit regressions, one for whether the pattern or the citation is on the network of trajectories, one for whether it is part of a split in that network, and one for whether it is part of a merger in that network. Then we have 2 more regressions. These are negative binomial regressions, which explain the number of drops or the number of rises. So that's a measure for how strong the split is, or how strong the broadening of the base will be for the merge. And again, that's pretty simple, so I'm not even going to bother to discuss any of these regression coefficients. Instead, I'm going to simply summarize these results, and I'm going to do that using this very colorful type of table. I apologize, it looks a bit primitive with all the flashy colors and so on, but this comes straight out of my work file, and that's the way I've been organizing my own thoughts, and I didn't have time to really put it into a nicer format. But let me explain to you what it means. What you have here is the description of the variables. These variables have colors to it, and the color indicates the group. So this orange color here, I could have put the orange together, but somehow it emerged with the green in between. But the orange variables here are all the variables that are related to the region. So this is the number of patterns in the region, number of patterns in the region, the scale of inventive effort in that particular region. And here you have oh, this is actually a mistake. The diversity of the region. It's the diversity, the technological diversity of the region. So these go together, variables. And then the blue ones are variables at the level of the pattern or the citation itself. The green one here are the variables related to the technology class, and the red ones are the variables related to the network of main class. Now, here, citation is on the network. This is the probit for whether it's on a split, or whether it's on a merge. It's the negative binomial for a drop. This is the negative binomial for the rise. Indicate that this particular variable is robustly significant, and that it points to the influence of the cumulativeness of the local search. In this case, that means that it's that if you have a region that has more patterns, that has a higher scale of network of trajectories. That variable. The V, that variable so let's take this as an example, the number of IPC classes, technology classes of the site and patent, that has a positive sign, which it has in this regression. So it means that variety is more important than being cumulative on just one technology field. And if you look at this table, then the interesting phenomenon is that you see that all the orange variables, so the regional ones, will have a C attached to them. There's no V's whatsoever in the orange part. So the variables indicate that local search or cumulativeness is a driving force, is coming from this regional kind of thing. Look instead on the blue part of the table, then it's not exclusively V's, but it's mostly V's. There's just two C's. So all of these things at the level of the individual patent are actually, or the individual citation, are actually pointing to the importance of variety. And the other ones are slightly more. Red ones have 4. And the green one, 3 C's. But it's mostly this this comparison of variables that have all the C's, and the pattern of citation level variables that have all the V's, which is pointing to and variety. Now, just very quickly, this part of the table here summarizes the marginal effects. Each of the regression tables gives you, besides the coefficients, which is often not so meaningful in a thing like a probit binomial, it gives you a marginal effect associated to that variable. So the marginal effect of a variable is in fact the increase or decrease, depending on the sign of that variable, the estimated sign, of the probability in a probit regression, the decrease of the probability of one increase of standard deviation in that variable from the mean. So you move from the mean value of that variable to the mean plus 1 standard deviation, and you look at what the effect of that is in terms of probability. And this is what we call the marginal effect, and it's a measure for how strongly that variable will the probability in the case of the probit, or the predicted number of events in the negative. What this top part of the table does here is it summarizes these marginal probabilities, the absolute value of that, across all the variables with a V or a C. So that's the regression. The citation on the and we sum all the marginal V's, and the sum of that is about 12%. You see that in that regression, the force, the combined force of variables, the C's, is larger than the combined force of all the variety, the non-local search variables. So about half, 5.4 against 11.7. And we've done that for all the regressions, and that's what this table up here does. So it shows you that in the formation of the network of trajectories, so is a citation on that network or not, it's especially the local search variables that have a strong force. That has the higher marginal effect. But the variety is not unimportant. It's a mix of the two. In the regressions for the splits, it's exactly the opposite. Yeah, the variety is more important, 16.5% marginal effect. And the local search thing is about half of that, 8.1% marginal effect. Same for the merges, 12 against 8. So there again, the variety is more important, is stronger than the local search. And it's the same for the negative binomials for the drop or the rise. 7 against 4, 4.3, 5.8 against 0. There's no C in this column. So that sort of leads me to the conclusion, which the set of conclusions, which is this. First of all, we find indeed, as we had expected, that non-local search contribute to the forming of the network of technological trajectories. Local search is the strongest force for determining what gets on a trajectory or on that network of trajectories, but non-local search is the stronger force in determining whether you're on a split, which is associated to path dependency, or whether you're on a merge, and how strong, how severe those splits are in terms of that path dependency, or how strong the merge is in terms of broadening the base. If you go back to this thing here again, if you look at the regional variables, the orange ones, then you can see that they all have an emphasis on the local kind of things. Regions contribute exclusively to local search forces, but technology is actually a stronger force for local search. You can see that these C's here, the green part, if you look at their marginal effects, it's not in the table here, but you can, I will have the numbers in my slides, they are actually more important than the regional ones. So that's essentially where I'd like to stop. Again, I apologize at this stage with developing countries, but I do think that there are certain implications for the developing countries, because whether the search is local depends on variety factors, will determine also what are the abilities or the chances for the fusion or catching up type of in the developing world. So that's something that should be investigated and researched more deeply, and we can certainly discuss that now here and see if you have any ideas or comments on this.
I'd like to thank you, Professor Verspagen, for this very interesting presentation. We had some people that couldn't listen to the presentation, but I could record everything in a better quality. So I'll share it with everyone right after the end of the webinar. So we are open to comments, questions. If anyone has a comment, please you can write it on the chat or ask it from our microphone. So the floor is open. So as no one mentioned anything, I have actually a question. So Professor, in your opinion, I mean, you mentioned briefly the implications of this topic to developing countries, and I would like to ask you the question in the sense that the patent share of developing countries in total patents is so low that it just doesn't. It's hard to actually compare it to developed ones. So how would you see a way to actually observe the impact of patent citations in developing countries? And if you do, you think that the same methodology can be applied in this sense?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. I actually would not recommend that this kind of analysis is being done exclusively for developing countries, because as you say, we find usually that there are very few patents from these countries, emerging from these countries. The few patents that are emerging are usually patents by foreign firms, often multinationals from developed countries who've opened up research labs in those countries. So it's not really, in many cases, a very good indicator of the technological kind of capability of that individual developing countries. But I do think that the implications of this are relevant for developing countries. Countries can catch up to the technological frontier, and this is by imitation. They try to imitate and adapt environment, and then gradually, by a process of upgrading, try to develop step by step the technological capabilities that will bring them closer to the technological frontier. That's exactly what a country like Korea has done in the past, starting a long way from the frontier, imitating knowledge, developing it, adapting it to the local context, and step by step coming closer. And that's exactly what a country like China is doing currently. Now, whether that can be done in a particular context or not, and it will also depend on the environments which contribute to that. If you have a particular field in which the role of local search is extremely strong, so you can only play a big role in a technology field if you are already, if you already have a lot of experience, etc., then it would be more difficult for a developing country to enter into that. So I would argue that if a developing country wants to catch up and imitate and adapt foreign knowledge, and that's something that this analysis tells us is important. And we would further disaggregate these results by particular fields or whatever, then we would be able to have an idea of which fields would be more easy to catch up than others. That's the kind of implications that I do see for developing countries. But of course, this needs more research, and it needs more research, particularly on how this process of adaptation and imitation is actually shaped. And that, I think, is a very important research field that certainly I hope many of you and many of the people in MERIT would actually be working on. In that sense, this is just a start.
Thank you, Professor. Thanks so much for your answer. We still have time for one other question. So if you have something, if someone has something to say right now, otherwise we can finish it, and then I will share it to all of you. Oh yeah, Professor, we have a question from Andy. She said, in developing countries, innovation is defined somewhat differently. Many times it's more about processes than new products. So any ideas on how can the region's contribution to local search forces?
I actually wouldn't say that it would be defined differently in developing countries. I think I talked a lot about imitation in my answer to the previous question. I think that it's very different from actual innovation, and that's exactly that idea of recombinant search. You recombine certain things, and that process I don't think is so different between developing countries and developed countries. In terms of process versus product innovation, sure, that could be the case. feel that I have very little to say on that because from this particular kind of analysis, we are really not able to determine whether this is a process innovation or product innovation. And we could look at individual paths that we find in this network, and then possibly by consulting experts on that particular field, we would be able to say something about it. But we cannot do it at the level of this kind of analysis. So I fear that in that sense, we'd have to probably think harder on how to address that, and I wouldn't exactly know how to do it now. Sorry for that.
Thank you again, Professor, for your question. Thank you, Andy, for your question as well, Professor, for your answer. I think that we are getting close to 7, so the YSI is going to have another presentation right after. And I would like to thank Professor Verspagen so much for your presence here in our webinars. And next week we'll have the third presentation in the webinar Innovation in Developing Countries by Professor Adam Ziermai. And I'll post more information about it in the Facebook and in the YSI community groups. Professor, thank you so much for your presence in this webinar.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, and thanks for all your attention.
Okay,
thanks.
Thank you all.